For this episode, Neil and I went up to Hauptkampflinie Common near Farnham to see an Atlantic wall built by Canadian Royal Engineers to prepare for D-Day. Hi Neil.
Hi Tim.
Neil, we're here in the Surrey Hills for this podcast. We are between Hindhead and Farnham. We're on an area called Hauptkampflinie Common, where you and I have done a lot of orienteering, and we are in a spot called the Atlantic Wall. And I remember coming out to do a run here with another good friend of ours, Dan, and he said, we'll run out to see the Atlantic Wall. I couldn't really imagine what it was. And this is it. It really is an Atlantic Wall, isn't it? It's 100 metres long, 3.5 metres deep, 3 metres tall.
Exactly. We're here on the reverse slope, just by the Lion's Mouth. It's grid reference 884413. We're on a slightly uphill slope, which we believe replicates what you might have found if you were on a beach and you were approaching part of the Atlantic Wall in Normandy or northern France.
Right. This area is incredibly sandy, and if we take the trees away, this could be a beach. So, exactly as you said, Neil, the slope of a beach leading up to this really imposing, reinforced steel Atlantic Wall. We've got a picture of Rommel with what looks like von Rundstedt to his left and I'll use that as the front page for this podcast. And he's walking alongside inspecting an Atlantic Wall, which is actually smaller than this one, looks no more than about 2 metres tall. When researching this, we found out that the design came from the French Resistance, who got the design from the Todt organisation who was responsible for building the Atlantic Wall. They smuggled those plans to the UK. The Canadian Royal Engineers built this in order to practice destroying it, what methods they could use to blast through it to have success on D-Day.
Exactly. It was built in 1943. We would speculate that this was possibly the worst case scenario, because in 1943, the Canadians wouldn't have known which beach they were attacking. Based on the plans, they built something which is hopefully, they would imagined, the worst case scenario. Interesting, in this 100-metre line wall, there was a set of gates in the middle, and there are 2 breaches, with massive breaches in this wall, that we would assume was successful. We don't know what caused that breach, but we will discuss the sort of weaponry that the Canadian Royal Engineers were possibly using a little bit later.
Neil, you were pointing out that we can tell the orientation of it. It's not symmetrical, is it? It's got these battlements on the shore side.
And so obviously that's the German defensive side, and the sharper front face, it would be facing the sea. So it is, as I say, it's 3 metres high, so it's an imposing structure to get through.
Well worth coming out to have a look at. Just probably 50 metres north of here, it looks to me, and we were speculating, that the Canadians had built a half-size model of it, again speculating, before building this one, maybe to test the concept, because it's parallel to and half size, isn't it?
Yeah, and again, it's reinforced concrete. There's lots of the reinforcement, and the wall has fallen apart in places. We don't know if it was due to practice demolition in 1943-44, but this whole area is littered around with, there's some dragon's teeth also in there. There's a couple of patches of dragon's teeth. Some of them have been upturned, and dragon's teeth are the 4-sided pyramids with the tops cut off, which were obstacles to prevent tanks making progress. They would have built them to practice either destroying them or bridge laying, getting over them with an armoured vehicle, basically.
Right. What we can see here is, it's clear to me that there are several different designs of dragon teeth obstacles here. Canadians are testing which tanks are going to be able to traverse what size obstacle.
Yeah.
And to me, that speaks to something that is a theme that is going to run the whole way through this, which is about preparation. They're prepared for a worst case scenario. As you point out, they don't know which beach they're going to land on. So there's a huge amount of preparation, to the extent of building their own life-size Atlantic wall and then try to come up with a method to punch through it.
Why choose this area? Firstly, it had been a Canadian training area in the First World War. Around this area of Surrey and Sussex and Hampshire, there were lots of Canadians. We came out with a statistic previously in one of our other podcasts. In Sussex alone, there were 70,000 Canadians. Well, in this area was the 3rd Canadian Division, and a division can be anywhere between 10,000 and 20,000 soldiers. In this particular area, Hankley Common, just south of Elstead, there was a number of camps. To the south, on Bramshot Common, there was 2 camps, and those camps were called Huron Camp and Ontario Camp. And at Ludshot Common, just near Greyshot, again, just about a couple of miles away, there was Superior Camp. And then at Headley Down, towards Borden, there was Erie Camp. Probably nobody actually barracked here, but they were all in these other camps. And the reason these areas were chosen in the First World War is actually they're all common land, sandy terrain, gorse and heathland. All these areas where these camps are firstly, it replicates what they might, a beach, but also it's low-grade agricultural land, so that was probably the reason, and also because we're close to the Channel ports as well, why these areas were chosen with so many Canadians in the area.
Got it. And it's not just infantry troops. Here, there are specialist troops. The Royal Canadian Engineers are based at Whitley, which is just further up the A3, so really close to here.
A particular division called the 79th Armoured Division, called Hobart's Funnies, and they had developed specifically for D-Day. They had lots of different armoured vehicles. They had flail tanks, they had Averies, which you've talked about, and they had bridge layers. All these were in this division, and those vehicles would have been spread out amongst lots of the other infantry divisions to assist with the actual beach landing.
And my understanding is that while Hobart was a British pioneer of tank development, Royal Canadian Engineers have taken a lead on this, or taken initiative on this. If you look at the photos of them online, you can see them at Whitley testing different concepts, testing different designs. They're taking a lead on this, and of course the reason they're taking a lead on this is they've got the experience of a beach landing. They've done the Dieppe raid. We've referenced that in a previous podcast, but they know what they're going to come up against when they're on the beach. They've had the experience of Churchill tanks on the beach, and they've learnt from that, and that's why they're taking the lead in developing these.
And it's worth noting, this would have been high on the mind of all Canadians, because sadly, 3,300 Canadians were either killed, wounded or captured on the Dieppe raid in 1942. So this is 1943. This is the whole reason they're here, preparing for D-Day, which obviously they don't know it's going to be in June 1944, but that's why they're doing all this preparation.
You've mentioned Dieppe. We should talk a little bit, I think, about the broader Canadian contribution to the war. There are Canadians in Britain as early as December 1939. That's 6 months before the European war really kicks off. Immediately, there's a division of Canadian infantry in the UK.
The population by the 1941 census in Canada is 11.5 million. During the course of the war, 1.1 million served in the Canadian military. That's 10% of the population. That's 730,000 in the army, and the rest of that 1.1 million in the Royal Navy and Royal Canadian Air Force. Or some of them were in the Royal Canadian Air Force, some of them were in the Royal Air Force because they volunteered. So
volunteer is the key there, Neil.
Yeah.
Canadian, the only military in the whole of World War II which is an all-volunteer army.
From that number, about 3.3 thousand killed on Dieppe, and a total in the war of 42,000 killed. So a massive contribution from the Canadians.
Yes, we can put these numbers in context, I think. Hard to be specific about this because the funny thing is, skipping ahead here, but while Canada has its own beach on D-Day, Juno Beach, but if we're talking about the wider Canadian contribution here, by the end of the war, there are around 430,000 Canadian soldiers in Europe. And to put that into context, 275,000 Germans taken prisoner at Stalingrad, 330 British and French troops rescued from the beaches at Dunkirk. It's a really significant contribution to the war effort. A couple of other things that popped up in our research, of course. Canada was making its own Lancaster bomber. It has its own military industrial base. Canada produced 430 Lancaster bombers, with Merlin engines produced by Packard. It's just interesting to imagine Canada as more than a Dominion army, but a real contributing military.
Should we have a look at the breaches in the Atlantic Wall? These practice breaches, I mean, they're significant. They've blown 2 great big holes in this Atlantic Wall. We tried to do a little bit of research. We don't know which weaponry or how they made these massive holes, but we can talk about 2 weapon systems which they could have used. And you've done more research, Tim, on the spigot based on a Churchill tank.
Yeah, sure.
We don't know that it created this hole, but there's a significant hole in this practice wall.
We can see that the wall was breached in a couple of places here. There would have been numerous attempts to do that, and we know that just up the road at Whitley that the Canadian Royal Engineers were experimenting with different types of Churchill tank. Now, mention the Churchill tank. Why are they focusing on that? The Churchill tank is ideal for this because it's really heavily armoured and it's got really good off-road capability. It's got a really deep track, and unique among tanks, it's got a side hatch. Now that allows the engineers to be able to drop stuff off, attach things. It's just a really good module for building these tanks. Yeah. Neil, you mentioned Hobart and the Hobart's funnies. A lot of people will be familiar with these. These are Churchill tanks with bridge laying equipment, with different types of weaponry, the flailing.
Yeah, I think the flail was mounted on a Sherman. I can't
Oh, I see,
remember.
right.
Yeah, so they weren't all Churchill tanks.
Oh, okay.
The double onion is worth talking about. That was mounted on a Churchill tank, and exactly as you say, Tim, we don't think they used it to breach these holes in this practice wall.
I think they did.
Oh, okay. So basically, it's a Churchill tank with a frame on it, which has explosives, and it drives up to the front face of the wall. The frame is released against the wall. Electric detonation cable is splayed out. The Churchill then recovers 30 metres, and as you said, Tim, it's heavily armoured, and then they blow up the frame, and obviously the crew in the Churchill are pretty well protected because it's well armoured, and that then breaches the wall. And as you say, it's a similar concept to the dam busters, and you roll the mine down the front face of the dam, and it blows up against the wall and causes the breach. That could have been used, the double onion could have been used to breach this hole in this practice Atlantic wall.
Yes, I think the double onion concept, I think that was developed at Whitley, and therefore I'm sure that this is the area they would have tested that. Now, the obvious problem with that is you're strapping high explosives to the front of a tank, and as you say, it had a frame that was vertically sticking out of the front, and it looked a bit like gate or something, didn't it? It was sort of a frame, and then it would be stuck into, they had prongs that would sort of stick into the beach or something to hold it in place
against the wall.
Right. We couldn't find any evidence as to whether they used a double onion design on D-Day or not. We suspect not, as well, there's no evidence of it at all. What they ended up using was a modified Churchill with a spigot mortar on the front. This was designed by a Canadian, a guy called Lieutenant Donovan. Someone from inside the Churchill tank would open the hatch next to the driver and place the explosive, the charge, mortar round inside the gun muzzle. Then it flips back round so that it's horizontal now. And it doesn't sound very secure, does it? And then it's just fired at the target. There's no sort of accuracy here. It's just because you're literally...
It would have been a short range as well. A very short range.
Yeah, literally, it's just 30 metres away, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we know that those were used on D-Day because there's actually an example of one on the beaches in Normandy. Those types of tanks were used throughout the Normandy campaign for going through bunkers and other fortified positions.
This is a really interesting area of Hankley because there's also, as well as this practice Atlantic wall, there's also fields of Dragon's Teeth, which we'll wander over to. The Brits used them as defensive structures to block roads, probably in 1940 when there was the scare of the Germans invading. I guess the concept here was that they were expecting to come across similar type obstacles on the beaches. What we've got here on Hankley Common is a couple of fields with Dragon's Teeth, and some of them have been turned over as if they've been attempted to possibly bridge them, destroy them, or possibly drive a tank over them to see how they get across these targets. The whole place round here, within 50 metres, is covered with of old concrete structures, which presumably they've tried to destroy, drive over, or just see how they would operate against the various vehicles that they've got.
When we're talking about the Canadians, once they've breached the wall, got into Normandy, and we've talked about the Canadian contribution, but looking at their history in Normandy, it's worth listing the German regiments which they came up against. Defending Caen is the 21st Panzer Division. That has been reconstituted from a division that was lost in Tunisia. The next division they come up against is the Panzer Lehr Division. This is a division that's made up of all of the Panzer teachers from Germany. So it's a Panzer training school, and they've built a division out of the out of the elite. Then they meet 12 SS, which is the Hitler Jugend Division, which has been made up of the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. This is another elite SS division. Then they meet in the Falaise Pocket, they meet the 2nd SS Das Reich. I'm just saying, this is a who's who of elite German regiments that the Canadians come across in the...
And this was the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, which landed on Juno Beach and had a pretty tough time with the actual assault on D-Day. But of all the assaulting units, actually managed to get the furthest on D-Day. I think I'm right in saying that.
Yeah, that's right.
Tim?
Yeah, made the biggest
inroads.
The biggest inroads, yes.
Yeah.
Standing here and looking at the Atlantic Wall that they've built, I think we can see why. This is about preparation and experience. The fact that the wall was so much bigger than anything that they would meet on D-Day must have prepared them incredibly well.
Let's wander up to the ridgeline. It's a lovely day here on Hankley Common, and we can talk a little bit about Hankley Common. We're on this nice gentle slope, which, as we say, replicates the gradient of the beach. We're just to the south of Lion's Mouth. Hankley Common has been used for a lot of things. It's been used... For those that in the local area probably know, it was used in Skyfall. It's been used for Blackadder. Being ex-military, done lots of exercises as well as orienteering on Hankley Common. There's also, once we get to the ridgeline, we'll see there's a drop zone in the middle. So parachute regiment and various other paratrain elements of the British Army parachute in here on occasions. I don't think they have recently. That's why it's a drop zone. Yeah, they certainly out of a C-130. An early episode of Doctor Who was also filmed here as well. And also one of the earlier Bond films was also filmed here, one of the Roger Moore ones. And it is a military training area. The British Army is so small, but usually when you come out on a weekend, you'd probably meet territorials here, or cadets.